So I just saw the new Netflix film, Rebel Ridge, directed by Jeremy Saulnier, starring Aaron Pierre, Anna Sophia Robb, and Don Johnson. Now I like this movie. I think that there are some aspects that I enjoyed more than other parts of it, and we'll get into that, but I still would say that this was an overall enjoyable experience. Rebel Ridge follows a man in a small town who has a bad run-in with the police, and they rob him. They take all of his cash, and he had a lot of cash on him. Not only do they rob him, but they basically tell him, we're legally allowed to do this, go hit the road. Obviously, our protagonist does not hit the road. He tries every legal and ethical matter to get his money back, and when all else fails, he takes matters into his own hands. We are now following our protagonist, Terry, who is going down this rabbit hole, this breadcrumb trail of corruption, police conspiracy, which begs the question, what are these cops doing here? And as the movie unfolds, we start to learn more and more just how deep everything goes. I'm a big fan of these type of mystery movies where the audience, along with the protagonist, is slowly unraveling and learning the big picture, this giant web. In fact, if you stick around to the end of the video for the similar recommendation, it's what, in my opinion, the greatest mystery conspiracy unfolding movie ever made. For me, the strongest part of Rebel Ridge was the unraveling of the conspiracy. The first 30 minutes of this movie, the setup and the tone felt grounded in realism. This wasn't going for a fantastical action thriller. This movie felt like a real life person unfolding this police corruption web. Tone and setting up your world in your movies is absolutely vital, so we as the audience can understand the repercussions of everything. For instance, if a character is running away from the cops in a comedy movie, it's not going to hit the same as if a character was running away from the cops in a drama. There's probably going to be some different emotional beats, different repercussions for our characters in that story. I bring this up because the tone for the first 30 minutes kind of gets whiplashed once we get to the police department scene in Rebel Ridge. Now, it's not badly written. In fact, it's a well-made, intense scene, but you get a big tonal shift. We basically went from a realistic approach to a more that probably wouldn't happen approach. So when the police department scene happens, it broke my immersion because I instantly thought, okay, well, that wouldn't happen in real life. Because prior to that, the 30 minutes that we got, everything would happen in real life. Rebel Ridge kind of bounces back between grounded realism to action M. Night Michael Bay-esque scenes. Again, not awful scenes. The movie never went full The Avengers, but there still was a juxtaposition there that felt jarring. That tonal whiplash prevented me from getting as invested as I was from the beginning, and I think the weakest part of this movie was the more fantastical action pieces that just didn't feel like they fit into the story that was already being set up. Especially the last act. The last 30 minutes of this movie, to me, are the weakest part. Not only does it drag a bit, but it loses that intensity because the stakes just don't feel as high. We went from realism to, okay, you're basically in a war now. And I'm not saying you can't have action in your noir films. Hell or High Water is a perfect example of being able to balance action, thrills, and that slow burn aspects of their film and still being very consistent throughout. And it is unfortunate that the climax is the least exciting part because Jeremy Saulnier, from what I've seen, is a very talented director when it comes to suspense. I've seen Green Room, which I liked, and I've seen Blue Ruin, which I loved. Those two movies are some of the most intense, underrated thrillers you'll get from the 2010s. Not gonna spoil those movies, but a reason why they are so visceral, so intense is because he is able to perfectly capture that grounded realism and keep it consistent from beginning to end. So every single action that those characters take and every single decision in those two movies that they make hits 100% harder for us as the audience because we understand fully the consequences. And don't get me wrong, Rebel Ridge is not boring at all. It's still intense at times, and there are some great suspense building sequences, especially, again, my favorite part, the unraveling of the conspiracy. Seeing these cops do the actions that they do really just sets this vibe of it's really just our protagonist against everybody else. The climax just doesn't hold a candle to the setup of the movie. The buildup was much better than the payoff. It was more intense, it was more intriguing, it was more interesting, you felt more invested. Once we get to the climax, it feels pretty predictable of how everything's going to tie up. But again, I reiterate, there are no bad scenes in this movie. It's still a fun, well-paced thriller. You won't be bored watching this movie, but there are elements that I just think that they could have done much better. A few of the keynotes, the cinematography was ugly. Not the actual shot composition, but the color grading. The color schemes was very just bland. which you could just toss to the side and say that was an obvious director's choice to create the atmosphere of the movie. A good example of this would be when David Fincher filmed Seven the way that he did, because Seven is fucking ugly, but it definitely captures the mood and the griminess and the dread of that sinister detective case type movie. But I think the gross looking piss yellow that Seven did definitely aided in the mood of the movie. It accomplished what it was trying to do. But for Rebel Ridge, it just felt so unpleasantly dry, but not in a Hell or High Water or No Country for Old Men sense, where those movies look dry but they look still beautiful. Like the cinematography is still great all around, like the colors that they use pop out when they need to. Rebel Ridge doesn't. The cinematography of Rebel Ridge feels like a glass of water, like it's just there. Meh. So it's not horrible to look at, but it was noticeable for me to talk about it. But on another keynote, the writing was solid. I enjoyed not only the story, but I enjoyed the script. This movie was surprisingly funny at times. There are a few one-liners that hit that didn't break the immersion of we're in a serious situation, why the fuck are you saying that? It was actually funny. The script was good, but so was the cast. Every single actor in this movie was great. Aaron Pierre as our protagonist Terry, he was funny, he was charismatic, but he was also stoic. Tony Soprano would call him the Gary Cooper type character, the strong but silent type. Anna Sophia Robb, the girl from Bridge to Terabithia, grown woman now, and she was great as Summer. And she put on this real southern accent. She talked like this throughout the whole movie. And Don Johnson, great in every role I've seen him in, and he's obviously great as the chief in this movie. Speaking of writing, I really enjoyed what Jeremy Saulnier did with the cops. He did this great in Green Room too, where you have these people who are obviously the antagonists, but they're not cartoonishly evil. That really helps set up the grounded realism in your tone. The Nazis from Green Room were not these Sons of Anarchy type Nazis where they just have like the N-word just tatted across their chest. They felt like genuine, real life, terrible people. Same with the cops in Rebel Ridge. These cops did not feel like cartoonish Klansmen. They kind of just felt like asshole, douchebag, power trip cops trying everything that they can to protect their own, to make sure that their corruption doesn't get exposed. Just real life people following their system, which again adds to the intensity. This is a well-paced thriller, good writing, good acting, even though there is some juxtaposition scenes in there that broke my immersion a little bit. I would still recommend this movie. I'm giving Rebel Ridge a 6 out of 10. It is streaming right now on Netflix, so go watch it. Now for the similar recommendation, there are a few that come to mind. You could do Jack Reacher, First Blood, but if you're looking for a movie that is grounded in realism and the mystery was what attracted you to Rebel Ridge as it did for me, then you can't go wrong with one of the greatest movies ever made, and that is of course Chinatown. 1974, unfortunately directed by Roman Polanski. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. It's a 10 out of 10. So here's a quick synopsis. We got Jack Nicholson. He's starring as Jake, who is a private investigator in Los Angeles in the 1950s. He's hired by a woman on an infidelity case. One thing leads to another, and he is entangled in this pretty dark, big conspiracy surrounding Los Angeles. Perfect mystery, perfect cast, perfect characters, perfect writing. It is so... I can't say too much. I want to do a full review analysis on Chinatown, but this is one of the few movies that's just a perfect movie. One of the best endings in movie history. Again, if you are into mystery noir films, this is your go-to. I would recommend not looking up anything. Don't look up a trailer, don't look up a summary, don't look up spoilers. The less you know about this movie, everything's just going to be better. But yeah, thank you so much. If there's any movies you would like to recommend to me or just anybody that reads your comment, please do so in the comment section. And I also do want to do another trilogy review. Either The Godfather or Back to the Future, maybe the Dark Knight trilogy. I'm not sure. Definitely when we head into October, I'm going to do a trilogy review on the Conjuring movies. I love horror, so you're going to see a lot of horror content as we get closer to October. But other than that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the next one.